on this already. Okay. Something I did not mention last time, the writing that they used we know of as cuneiform. You'll find some examples if you follow along in your book. But particularly on page 15, how that writing seems to have evolved. The cuneiform is they eventually evolved into wedge-shaped figures. Looks like this. Or in the case of one particular word, the only cuneiform word I ever learned was this one, and it's one of the more common words you'll see in the cuneiform. Bang, bang. Now, the reason they picked these symbols was easy to do. Because all you had to do to get a cuneiform symbol, just hit a clay tablet one time, bang, or maybe twist your arm 90 degrees, hit a clay tablet again. You got bang, bang, twist 90 degrees, bang, and there it was. And they could do it fairly rapidly. Now, sometimes in some languages, they say they went at 45-degree angles. Generally, though, the wedges either went from left to right or up to down, and even at 45, they seldom ever went backwards. But generally, from left to right. Now, in other words, the wedge-shaped characters you see are the cuneiform. Now, way back in 2400 BC, they went in all sorts of ways about cuneiform, but eventually they made it simpler, as they just simply decided we could just hit a bang, 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 just did the writing by using a tool that made wedge shapes in the clay. And 3,000 years later, we can read the tablets. And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but we have more records from Sumer than we do for Greece, Rome, combined. More records from that time period, and I keep reading. I mean, I first read this 44 years ago, and I keep reading it. A lot of the clay tablets that we have discovered, nobody has yet read, and we don't know what we might discover if we bother to read them. All right. I mentioned, I believe, Sargon last time. Go next to Hammurabi. Like the other ancient great kings, Hammurabi was a conqueror. He started off by conquering a weaker city-state nearby, and then he used the armies from that city-state combined with his to conquer another one. And it took him 30 years. He would conquer and then try to make peace and open up trade relations and encourage his people to intermarry with the people he conquered. And after 30 years, he built himself up an empire. His capital was Babylon. Hammurabi is remembered for his law code. Your book gives us a sample of it. And it basically was a law code of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you get in a struggle with someone and knocked out his tooth, your own tooth was to be knocked out also. If you knocked out someone's eye in a scuffle, yours was to also be put out. And they had laws like a lot about the code of Hammurabi is similar to the law code of Moses, and a lot of persons have wondered how much Moses might have been influenced by Hammurabi. After all, Moses was brought up in Pharaoh's house, and he was educated in all the rule of the Egyptians. But there's a lot from the code that seems to that Moses appears to possibly have copied. Again, each of you can make up your mind whether he would have or not. Their religion, I do have on your on your iCollege page something about the Sumerian deities. Apparently, they believe that Anu was the first one of their gods to descend on them from heaven. From the word Anu, we get the word Uranus. See this A-N-U here in the word Uranus. And again, in Greek mythology, Uranus was the first of the gods, and he was the father of Saturn, who in turn was the father of Zeus. Anu was the father of Enki and Enlil. Enlil, the god of storms, the god of thunder, and a lot of persons associate Enlil with Jupiter, also a thunder god, or Thor, also a thunder god. Thor, Jupiter. There's a lot of these mythologies that we find throughout the Western world, and actually we find all over Eurasia, including China and India. A lot of these mythologies appear to have had the same pattern. Again, these gods supposedly came to earth, set themselves up in temples, and at first did not even claim to be gods. They were looked on as being gods by later generations, but not so while they were, supposedly while they were on earth. Again, each of you can make up your mind for yourself what you believe. In my 2 o'clock class, when I was telling them some of the same stories I told you one time, but what if 1,000 years from now, somebody digs up a Star Wars movie and makes it into, say, that claims that we actually traveled in space, during that time. Again, folks, if you think these stories are just tales that they made up, what you believe about them will be determined by your worldview. Again, you can think that if you want to. Nobody can prove it one way or another. All right. Your book mentions Gilgamesh. Oh yeah, there's something I must mention. Polytheism is the worship of many gods, as opposed to monotheism, is the worship of just one God. Now, in view of the way today's world goes with some of the major Western religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam being monotheistic, it's difficult to understand that monotheism appears to have died out for many hundreds of years. And yet, if you go back far enough, there are a lot of persons who believe the original religion of mankind was monotheism, worship of one God. Then that monotheism broke down into polytheism as time went on. Then as time went on farther, polytheism gave way back to monotheism again. You might wonder, well, what's the big deal? Here, to me, is the big deal about it. If the wind is God, if the planets are God, if the sun is God, if nature is God, then that means that all of nature has a mind of its own. If, on the other hand, nature is not God, that means nature has to obey the laws of God. Folk, polytheistic societies never created anything like a laptop computer, or even like this obsolete cell phone. You may not realize this. I know this cell phone is somewhat obsolete. I'm like an old man. I keep my stuff for many years. There are a million little transistors inside that thing that work together. And there were many other phones made like this one. And guess what? You put together another phone just like this one, it will do the same thing this one does. You might say, hey, that's obvious. What's the big deal? The ancients did not believe there was enough order in the universe to where they could put together gadgets that would always come out the same way. Now, in other words, they put a cake in the oven, but they didn't have a good way to keep the oven temperature constant, so sometimes the cake would turn out one way and sometimes it would turn out another. Now today we have ovens that we can control the temperature, we can exactly measure everything, and every Hostess Twinkies cake that they put in the oven is going to come out tasting the same way because the Hostess manufacturers believe that there's enough order in the universe that they can make their cakes all alike. And almost every McDonald's hamburger and every place you go is going to taste just alike because they're processed with a certain way. But in the ancient world, they could not get that kind of regularity and order out of the universe because, one thing, being polytheistic, they did not believe there was that much regularity and order in the universe. So again, polytheistic societies tended to not develop technology, tended to not make the advances in science and technology that you'll find in monotheistic societies. Now, if any of you want to research that further, argue with it, the floor is open. You're welcome. Yeah, to me, it makes a big difference. Again, they tried to determine the will of the gods through divination. There were several ways you could divine. One, of course, was studying the stars. This practice is called astrology. Another way, they would open up an animal and study the color of its intestines. And if the color seemed to be one way, that meant that the gods were angry or didn't want them to do a certain thing. If the intestines appeared another way, that meant that the gods were said it was okay to do what they were planning to do, but they would set up a plan. You know, is this plan in accordance with the will of the gods, or will this plan succeed and prosper? And they would try to determine the will of the gods by various means.